We're talking about the Steelers' offensive line depth chart battles. Kevin Dotson versus Kendrick Green at left guard. It's going to be an important matchup to see how this offensive line is formed. I wrote about this earlier in minicamp when I talked to both these players about this matchup, but also I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about it and give you some insight along with some special teams talks on your Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video if you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content whenever we have breaking news updates or any bonus questions we answer on the air. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Go ahead and rate us 5 stars with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts, and you'll get a special shout out at the end of the show. I wanted to lead off today talking about that very left guard battle that I mentioned in the opening. We're talking about, of course, again, Dotson, third-year player, coming back from an injury last year. He feels better about it. He's set to be the team's left guard. Last year, the Steelers drafted Kendrick Green out of the third round. He was a guard for most of his time at Illinois. They moved him to center. Didn't work out, didn't play too well. Now it's Mason Cole at center and Kendrick Green battling with Kevin Dotson. This was a question that was asked from one of our listeners, Daniel from San Antonio. I want to give the floor to Daniel, and then we'll get on with this conversation and a little bit more analysis into who these two guys are and how I see this battle playing out. But first, here's Daniel from San Antonio.
Hey, Chris, this is Daniel from State of the Steelers, a YouTube channel from a fan's perspective out of San Antonio, Texas. Longtime watcher of the show, longtime follower. My question for you is going to be about the left guard position. How big or how real is that battle between Kendrick Green and Dodson? I know that Kendrick Green was a left guard in college, transitioned to the center position last year, wasn't doing so well. But Dodson came in last year. There were some reports that something was up. And, he ended up finishing the season injured and whatnot. Is there really a true battle there? And does Dodson have it, or do you think Green can push him? And is there a chance that maybe Green gets the upset? Thank you so much for taking my call. Hopefully I make it on the show. Go Steelers.
Thank you, Daniel, for your question. Just a reminder, Steeler Nation is everywhere. We get calls from all over the place. We've had calls from England on this show. We've had calls from California, Texas, as you just saw there, all over the place. But to Daniel's question here about the offensive line, I actually spoke to both of these guys in the Steelers locker room during minicamp about this battle. And we weren't, the rule of Steelers camp and practices and things like that is we as reporters aren't allowed to say what we're seeing past the warm-up period unless a player talks to us about it. And both players confirmed to us what exactly we were seeing is that these guys were splitting the first team reps 50-50. I even wrote about this article on an article about this on SteelersNow.com during minicamp. That to me was a sign that's like, hey, the Steelers, they do see a place for Kendrick Green somewhere in this offensive line. They don't want him to just be like, oh, well, you lost the center battle. Maybe you need to keep working in that position. They want to put him back at his strength. What I'll say about Kevin Dotson first, before we go there, is he is still my favorite for this battle, to answer your question, Daniel. But I wouldn't be shocked if Kendrick Green puts up a heck of a fight in training camp. One thing about Kendrick Green that people need to remember is when you're looking at Kendrick Green, you're looking at him on the roster. First of all, he's listed at 6'4". He's not 6'4". He's 6'1". That's a misnomer. That's just a thing that happens with stats and depth chart things and roster things. It's weird. But he's officially 6'1" as he was measured at the scouting combine. But where he blew up at the combine was that he ran a 4.89 40-yard dash, was really explosive with a 35.5-inch vertical, had a really good broad jump. All these things to show, wow, like coming out of his stance, this guy is flying. He's just booming out of his stance. He just move really quickly. That got a lot of people thinking like, hey, this guy could be mobile, hit in space, and do a lot of things that, guards don't typically do. So that was what the Steelers were hoping he could do from the center position, because for years, Marquise Pouncey, their guy who was an all-pro center, in my book, he should be a Hall of Famer. He was a guy who could pull and hit in space. He was a guy that could get out in front of plays. How many times did you see him in front of Le'Veon Bell or whoever was carrying the ball at the time and just blocking somebody 2, 5, 10 yards downfield and moving pretty well while doing it? That's what they were hoping Kendrick Green could be. But Kendrick could go out and hit in space. So the problem was he wasn't good enough at snapping the ball while managing the middle of the offensive line and being effective in a gap, which is very difficult, especially when you go up against some of the big bruising defensive tackles in the NFL. He just wasn't able to be consistent enough. He had some ups and downs, but not nearly consistent enough to be the starting center that they want for their offensive line moving forward, which is why they moved him to left guard. Well, he'll be more comfortable. Now, Kevin Dotson, on the other hand, he also had a shift of comfort because he played right guard typically through his entire career. He even told me he had never played left guard before he came to the Steelers, not even like in high school. And moving to left guard required a mental shift on his part. Everything that he had the muscle memory of going to his on the right side had to be flipped, and he was thinking about it a lot, and that caused him to make some mistakes or be a little bit slower, and that allowed guys to beat him. He says now he feels comfortable there. So where is this actually going to come down to? How are these guys actually going to make their hay? Well, one, they're going to have to be more responsible in pass protection because these are two guys that gave up a considerable amount of pressures, and we'll get to those specific numbers in the second segment. But these were guys that were giving up pressure up the middle that is inexcusable, especially for an immobile quarterback like Ben Roethlisberger was last year. However, with these more mobile quarterbacks, maybe those won't count for as much, but they still need to make sure they're protected. Also, in the run game, they need to be more forceful. They need to be guys that you can count on. Like, hey, if Najee Harris goes to this gap, he can trust that you're not going to let this defensive tackle slip through into a gap and occupy that space. That's a place that Najee Harris can attack. Both of these guys, I think, have the potential to be starters. But a big reason I like Kevin Dotson is his frame. He's 6'4". He's shown the capacity to be able to hit, play well when his head is together. We saw that a bit in 2020. We saw flashes of it in 2021, but not nearly consistent as enough. And that's why he doesn't have a guaranteed spot, just like Kendrick Green doesn't have a guaranteed spot. Both of these guys are fighting in a very early stage of their careers. But I want to look specifically at some numbers that we've charted, or not that we've charted, that PFF has charted, that kind of show things. And not grades. I'm not looking at grades because that's where PFF, I agree, goes bonkers. But just looking at where pressures were given up, how things were done when guys were lined up at different spots. I do think there is value in that and adds more to this discussion. So we'll do that in just a sec here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to guys about Built Bar. They've got a new puff flavor out, and it's coconut brownie chunk. From the people who invented healthy, tasty, and comes the latest gift to your taste buds. If you've probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but the Built Puff is even better. That's right. It's the Built Bar flavor that you love, but it's going to be more marshmallowy, easier to chew, lighter, and a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. But stop drooling and listen. They're good for you, low calories, low sugar, high protein, all delicious. Coconut Brownie Chunks Puffs are only here for a limited time, though. So go to Built.com to make sure you don't miss out. They're going fast because they taste amazing. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. The best part of Built Puffs is, of course, they taste amazing, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they are actually good for you. They're the perfect treat, perfect for when you've got a craving for something and you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or if you need a quick, healthy snack, they are an excellent source of protein. With delicious coconut, rich, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow, all those flavors packed into one Built Puff. Go to Built.com right now and use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your next order of Built Bars or Built Puffs when you visit Built.com. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED 15 for 15% off your next order of Built.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing our talk about this left guard battle. Now, I wanted to go over some specifics here on their stats and how they were graded out and things. Again, not the specific grades themselves, but Here's a look at Kevin Dotson in 2014. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on Apple, I do apologize. You won't be able to see it. But if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the pause button, look in a little bit closer. It is tougher to see. However, you can see that when Kevin Dotson played in 2011, he gave up 3 sacks, gave up 2 quarterback hits, 5 hurries, and 10 pressures in just 9 games played. So that's not a good rate. Those were not the numbers that you were looking for from the guy that was rated as one of the best pass protectors in college football when he came out of the NFL draft. However, you look at Kendrick Green's numbers, and very, very similar, but over a longer period of time. Also 3 sacks, 4 quarterback hits allowed, 11 hurries, 18 pressures allowed, an efficiency rate according to PFF of 98.2% versus 98% of Kevin Dotson. So you look at that and say, well, Chris, they're pretty much the same. But here's where I say, okay, yes, in that season, they were. Both were out of their element a little bit. But the one thing I've seen from Kevin Dotson is that when his head is on straight, he plays pretty well. And that's why people were so excited about him going from 2020 to 2021. Here's a look back at his 2020 stats. You look through, he only played, 8 games, and so not a huge sample size, but he started for 6 of them. And in those games, he gave up 0 sacks, 0 quarterback hits, and a single hurry. Now, granted, the first half of those games were right guard. The second half of those games were left guard. And that was the flip that we were talking about there. He also got called for 3 penalties during that span versus 5 penalties this past year. Kendrick Green noted for 9 penalties this past year. But again, if you look at those Kevin Dotson numbers from 2020, they're not the level that you're like, okay, that makes sense for a starting left guard. Doesn't give up pressures, better in the hole when blocking. But remember what I said yesterday on the Tuesday episode with Tony Serino talking about here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. When you have veterans around you who can set a tone and you can kind of base yourself off of, it makes your job that much easier. Remember, that Kevin Dotson back then, he was playing next to Maurkice Pouncey, David DeCastro, 2 guys that were able to hold it down in that spot. These were the all-pro, Pro Bowl, superstar linemen that they drafted to kind of anchor the line. That helped balance things out. And even just Maurkice Pouncey himself can help settle down younger offensive linemen. This is a big reason why I said they needed to go get a player like a James Daniels. He's a veteran who's played. He has experience, and if he can be a calming presence and a guy that helps everyone feed off of what he's doing successfully, that can help everyone else. Kendrick Green, if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, why didn't the Steelers do that for Kendrick Green last year? It seems unfair. I'd agree if that was their plan all along. But remember, when they drafted Kendrick Green in 2021, they did that while thinking David DeCastro was coming back last year. The addition of Trey Turner didn't happen until we found out, oh, wait a minute, David DeCastro's not playing. That's a problem. And so then you inserted Trey Turner in there. And to me, that was a big problem with last year. And Kevin Colbert even said his biggest regret was not doing more to address the offensive line. The Steelers didn't want to get, I think they didn't want to get too aggressive because they weren't sure if more injuries would happen. They were still waiting to see what would happen with Stephon Tuitt. There were so many things up in the air last year. Ben Roethlisberger's health, a lot of different things going on. So not to excuse them not making a move to help in that situation, but they were full on with a plan that David DeCastro and Stephon Tuitt, 2 really important players over the last several years, were going to be back. Now, Stephon Tuitt on the defensive side of the ball, we've talked that into ad nauseum. We've gone over that a million times. But David DeCastro not being there, even if he wasn't the all-pro version of David DeCastro, he'd be the veteran that could set the tone, kind of help everyone out, put everyone on base, and everyone could kind of look at it and say, hey, I'm going to follow this guy's lead. He's going to set the tone. He's going to be the leader that I follow day in and day out to make myself better. If Kendrick Green had him to his right all season long, I'm pretty confident that he would have had a better rookie season. The same way that people were looking at B.J. Finney when he was replacing Maurkice Pouncey, how he was having good plays. Even if you remember a Fernando Velasco, another guy that replaced Pouncey for a long, stronger stretch of time during the mid-2010s there for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, how much of this is based off of the guys around you? I think is not something that's given enough credit for when we're talking about this in public spaces or Twitter or anything like that. So I do think that Kevin Dotson got that benefit a little bit in 2019, and that's why, or 2020, excuse me, and that's why we saw him play better in 2020, and that's why people were so excited about him. But just like Kendrick Green, to his right, you think about Kevin Dotson, he went from having, veteran to his left, veteran to his right, to two rookies to his right and left. Not just Kendrick Green, but Dan Moore Jr. And you think about being the guy who's trying to get his footing in the NFL. This becomes his first year as a full-time starter, and he's a fourth-round pick. This isn't, Quentin Nelson we're talking about here, a guy that was drafted in the top 10 or whatever, whenever Quentin Nelson was drafted. But you get my point. He was drafted high, and Kevin Dotson was a fourth-round pick. That's a lot to put on a guy of who's coming in with that. And his pressure right now is, hey, I got to make sure I play well enough to make the team. Now you've got questions all around, and you got a rookie to your right in Kendrick Green, who to his right, you have another guy in Trey Turner, who he's just trying to figure out how the Steelers work. And he's a veteran, but he's not a veteran that knows the team, nor is he a multi-time All-Pro, Pro Bowl type of guy like David DeCastro. That's where I think a lot of this fault lies. And why I still favor Kevin Dotson is that I think that with his frame and the things that we've seen him put on tape when things are just at least at a level position, because the 2020 Steelers offensive line still wasn't elite by any means. It was still had its issues. Marquise Pouncey was on his last legs. But again, his presence on the field, much like Ben Roethlisberger in the fourth quarter, Ben Roethlisberger wasn't the elite quarterback that he was in his prior years. But he was the guy in the fourth quarter who knew, hey, this is the read. This is what we're going to do. This is what they like to do. Let's go do this. And that's why you saw him throw 12 fourth quarter touchdowns to one fourth quarter interception all season long. Marquise Pouncey wasn't going to pull and hit you 10 yards downfield in 2020 when he was on his last season, nor was he going to blow up the biggest defensive tackle in the hole. But he was going to communicate and say, guys, this is what we're doing right here. Let's get it done. And you can even see that, with the high snap problems that he had, that led to other issues. My point in saying that is that his presence on the line helped Kevin Dotson. I'm not saying Mason Cole is that at center. I am saying James Daniels might be a helping point there, but also Kevin Dotson being older will give him an edge here. I think that him being older, his 6'4" frame, he'll be better suited to take on the bigs that line up in A gap and B gap for the Pittsburgh Steelers, more so than Kendrick Green. Now, injuries happen all the time in football, especially on the offensive line. Would not be surprised if at some point this season, Dotson or Daniels or somebody gets hurt and Kendrick Green is vaulted back into the starting lineup, and then all of a sudden you see a boosted version of him making plays, or at least making those downfield blocks, using that explosiveness that we've seen glimpses of. Because there's times you could look back on his tape for 2021 as a rookie. There were times he was flying. You're like, whoa, that guy's moving. He's not hitting anybody, but he's moving. If he can put that together, I do think Kendrick Green becomes a better player next to whoever he's lined up to next year. And it won't matter as much that he's starting on a line of a bunch of guys who are all trying to just fit into the NFL. That was why they signed James Daniels. That was why they signed Mason Cole. That's why they kept Chukwuma Okorafor. They wanted three guys who had several years of experience, were young and ambitious, but still guys who could say, hey, this is what the expectations are. We're going to be able to operate here, and then try to hope that either Kevin Dotson or Kendrick Green or Dan Moore or all of them, or, a mix of them, could pick it up and become NFL quality starter type of guys. And there were each of them had moments, even Dan Moore Jr. They had moments where they were quality guys, that they were starting type of guys, but they need to be consistent. And that's what the Steelers are going to be looking for in their offensive line. So to answer your question, Daniel, thanks again for your question. Remember, if you're wanting to ever call in and give us a voicemail to get a question answered like this, all you got to do is call our hotline, 412-223-6644. Leave a voicemail with your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute as best you can. Also, email losteelerstopicbag@gmail.com with an attached MP3. Again, your name, where you're from, attached to that. We try to get you all on the show. We want to get your questions answered because we do appreciate when people have questions and we can answer them on the air. So, without further ado, we will talk more about this battle once training camp comes, because when the pads go on, a lot of different things are going to change. We're going to see these guys and see how much more physical they are and how much more prepared they are. That is going to be the next test. All we've seen right now is just guys in football helmets and shorts and just kind of moving around and doing what they're supposed to do in mini camp and OTAs. You don't get to really evaluate offensive linemen there. Sure, they looked fine, they looked comfortable, whatever. We'll see when the pads go on who's more physical, who's more pointed, and who wins out in that left guard battle, as well as the rest of the offensive line. But we have another question that's going to address a group that I don't talk about a lot on this show. That's the special teams. We'll talk about that in a minute right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're switching up the topic. We talked about the offensive line and specifically Kendrick Green and Kevin Dotson in their past in the last two segments. But I wanted to switch it up because someone, a caller, Luke from Huntington, New Jersey, had a good question about special teams. He's like, you don't talk about this a lot. You're right. We'll get to your question. Here's Luke.
What's up, Chris? This is Luke from Hunterdon County, New Jersey. Love the show. Not only am I a huge Steelers fan, but I'm just a huge football junkie in general. And one phase of the game that I don't think you talk about too much is our special teams unit. For the past 5 years, I'm pretty sure that you're well aware that we're not the best in this area of the game. But in my opinion, we've made some moves this offseason to improve that game. I just wanted to get your take on that, with the additions of Olszewski. And then I think Austin can definitely be a big spark in the return game for us. Thank you again. Love the show.
Thank you, Luke, for your question. We always appreciate people who call in and ask questions. That's a good question. It's a good point. I don't talk much about special teams. Why? It's special teams. We talk a lot about offense, defense, all the personnel. Special teams just don't get the ball rolling a whole lot but it is important to talk about because special teams can and does win games sometimes. But let's talk about special teams. Now, the person, if you're watching on YouTube, the person who I threw the picture up for Luke's call was Danny Smith, the current special teams coach. He's been there since 2013. Danny Smith is a guy who takes a lot of heat, I think, not deservingly so. When something goes afoul, when Presley Harvin doesn't punt well, and he doesn't try to dodge it, he says, "Hey, it's my responsibility to get him prepared." A lot of the problems that I think people see and point at, like returning and punt mistakes, those are all particularly on, hey, this is the person we put out there. This is the talent we've invested in. This is what we've got right now. Now, I've talked about in this show previously about Presley Harvin, how rough of a year he had it. I wrote about it on SteelersNow.com about how much he went through. Remember, he lost his father, he lost his grandmother, all in the span of like a couple weeks. And it was a terrible time for him. Their health was struggling, so it was something that bugged him for most of the season while he was adapting to being in the NFL, taking a lot of heat in social media and in the public eye. It was rough for him. So this year he does get a bit of a mulligan. Now, Danny Smith has also told me, I interviewed him about this, and he was like, "There's no if he messes up this year, there's no hey, we're hoping we'll hold on to you because of your past. Listen, buddy, you got to get it together." And that's what they've said. And hey, talking to Presley Harvin, he said he'd get there. But the thing that I think that Danny Smith has done so well is the coordination of the Steelers special teams. That's not just Chris Boswell kicking or Presley Harvin punting or whoever's the returner right now. Now, before we get into that, I will say returning does have to be better. They need to get better guys out there. Gunnar Olszewski, I think he's been a Pro Bowl guy at that position. He's had a touchdown for the Patriots. You're hoping, if nothing else, he's your guy. He takes over both punt and kick returns, and you're happy there because he's a solid dude who knows what he's doing there. But you're really excited about Calvin Austin and how fast he is, right? I know everyone's on this podcast thinking, but what about Calvin Austin? I'm right with you. I'm excited to see what he can do back there. His pure speed, quick, and not just straight line speed, but football speed does get me excited to see what he could do in the return game. I'm excited for Gunnar Olszewski. He's shifty, but Gunnar don't got Calvin Austin's speed. And we've seen what speed can truly do for a return game. Now, in recent years, the Steelers had guys like Ryan Switzer being their return guy, and that was primarily because Ryan Switzer didn't fumble a whole lot, and they were trying to put other guys in there who were fast, but they weren't reliable with the football. Ray McLeod kind of took over because he was like, "Hey, I'm reliable with the football, and I'm fast," and they wanted to give him those shots. But I think also Steelers fans are spoiled because you had Antonio Brown as a returner for so many years, and eventually they were like, "Listen, we don't want to put Brown on the return team and get him hurt from his main job, which is being the best receiver in the NFL." But I mean, heck, The first play that Antonio Brown ever had as a Pittsburgh Steeler was the opening kickoff against the Tennessee Titans, and I believe it was 2010. Yeah, his first it was like week 2, and he took a 100-yard kickoff back for a touchdown, and so went the legend of Antonio Brown. I think he did that at least 4 or 5 times in his career. The Steelers haven't had that, but again, Antonio Brown is a special player that doesn't come along too often. We'll see if those special players are. But where Denny Smith comes in, and the special teams point that I wanted to talk about here is he has gotten this group to be a lot more coordinated than it was before he arrived. Now, to space that out, Mike Tomlin, 15 seasons. Danny Smith has been here for 9 of them. The 6 before then are vastly different when you look at how they what happened there. Let's start with blocked punts. In the 6 seasons before Danny Smith arrived, the Steelers had allowed 2 blocked punts. Those 2 block punts came in the last 2 years before Danny Smith. It was becoming a problem, and it was a problem in the early years of Danny Smith. For 4 straight years, the Steelers allowed at least 1 block punt per season, and then they did again in 2016. If you don't think, well, you're thinking, oh, well, 1 block punt per season? Not that bad. But a block punt allowed can ruin a game. It can literally flip the game over, cause a whole lot of problems. It became and we've seen it how, I mean, if you go back and look, the Buffalo Bills will tell you in week 1 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a block punt can literally lose you a game, as it did when the Steelers blocked the punt of the Buffalo Bills in week 1, got a touchdown out of it, and that touchdown was the very distance that they won by. But you go back to those block punts that I was talking about, again, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and then again 2016. That 2016 block punt is the last one the Steelers have allowed. We're in 2021. That means 17, 18, 19, 20, 5 years of not allowing a blocked punt. That's what the effect of Danny Smith has had. And if you're probably thinking, well, wait, what does Danny Smith have to do with that? Like, what does he do? I'll tell you, as a person who's seen him at Latrobe, and this is years ago when they were at Latrobe, because they haven't been at Latrobe since 2019 because of COVID. But when a player, a rookie, a second-year guy, any special teams guy who's even if he's on the second team of special teams, after practice is over at Latrobe, guys are kind of dispersing, and they'll go up the hill, past all the autographs, they'll sign stuff, and as they're walking up to go get their dinner or their lunch, depending on which practice it is, Danny Smith will like sneak up behind him. Like, you'll see him kind of like walking up, and he'll be like, "Hey, you know, I always saw him do it to Cam Sutton too. He was like, "Hey, Cam, this happens on this play. What do you do?" And he just quizzes them on different scenarios. If this team shifts to this gap, or if this team shifts to that gap, if we call this and they do this, what is your responsibility? The way he quizzes them, the intensity, the always on it type of guy, the go, go, go. You always, if you hear him at practice or hear him any type of thing, you always hear him loud and effective. That's Danny Smith. He challenges his players all the time. People always make fun of him because he chews so much gum. He's just an intense guy who's always on it. And that's gotten him results. Now, block punts are one stat. Let's look at allowed returns. Now, because we could talk about returns, but again, I truly think that scoring on returns, it can be a team thing as well. But a lot of it is also about the return guy. And that's what we saw when they had Antonio Brown, what they were doing with him. So I want to look at allowed returns and the touchdowns. I won't get into yardage and everything, but before Danny Smith took over in the 6 seasons that were there, the Steelers were averaging at least 1 special teams touchdown per season in Mike Tomlin's first 6 years. They allowed 1 in 2007, 3 in 2009, 1 in 2010, and 1 in 2012, meaning that they basically gave 1 up every single year. There were only 2 years that they didn't, and in 2009 they gave up 3 that kind of made up for it. So that was a problem, and that was something that Mike Tomlin wanted to fix when they hired Danny Smith. Since then, they've given up 3 special teams touchdowns in 9 seasons. So 6-6 or 3-9. You see a better rate there. But not only that, let's look back at the ones that they've given up. In 2014, Danny Smith's second year, when he was still getting a foothold and thing, that was when they had allowed their second blocked punt under Danny Smith. He was still establishing his culture with the team, finding his guys, and kind of setting his ways into the organization. 2016, they did allow 1. 2018 is the last time this team allowed a special teams touchdown. And do you remember what that was? It was Sunday Night Football against the San Diego Chargers before they moved to Los Angeles, when they had a return where there were two obvious blocks in the back that everyone was screaming about all week because those blocks kick-started a huge comeback by the Chargers and the largest comeback that's been allowed by the Steelers in the Mike Tomlin era. The one play, if it wasn't for that one play, they had two obvious things that should have been called that sprung the entire play. The last time that you could look for either a blocked punt or a special teams touchdown allowed under Danny Smith is 2016. Now, I'm not saying Danny's perfect. There's certainly things that they can improve. They do allow a lot of return yards. He could get Presley Harvin to be sharper. Sure, there are things like that. But as far as getting the special teams to be a more cohesive unit, special teams used to be a major concern for the Pittsburgh Steelers, to the point where they would give up those touchdowns almost regularly, block punts. It was a wild card situation. They flip of a coin to say, like, oh man, what's it gonna be like today? But since Danny Smith has been there, especially in the most recent years, you haven't had to worry about that. Whereas special teams hasn't been an explosive part of the game. Whereas, looking at return yards, and they haven't had an explosive returner since Antonio Brown. They have been the group that, hey, we're not going to lose the game for you. And they've also blocked punts that have gotten them big wins. You might remember them blocking the punt of the Buffalo Bills this year. They should have had a blocked field goal return for a touchdown against the Green Bay Packers that was called back wrongly, as we saw on the replay when Joe Hayden did not move before the ball was snapped. And had they called that correctly, it would have been a 10-point swing in a game that the Steelers lost by 10 points to the Green Bay Packers. And how would the season have gone differently if just that one play would have been allowed to go on? I digress. The point being, special teams, Luke, to your question, I do think does need work. Presley Harvin has to get better. We have to see what happens in the return game. But Danny Smith is the coach that I think needs to be there. Now, he's up there. This may be his last hurrah. He may have, only a couple more years in him. But I do think the culture that he's established to pressure guys consistently and say, hey, do your jobs on these roles has really helped the Steelers special teams not become a facet that they lose games by. And in fact, you look at Chris Boswell, the only season that you could really say that he even had a rough year was 2018 when we found out he was dealing with an injury. But since then, he's been the most consistent or second most consistent kicker in the NFL behind Justin Tucker. I think Danny Smith's done a lot. The special teams could be better. They can get a better return guy. But all in all, I do think Danny Smith is doing a good job there. So there's my special teams analysis of the Pittsburgh Steelers for now. I'm sure we'll get back to more of this as the season gets closer. But thanks again to Luke, Daniel, and everybody who calls into the Locked On Steelers hotline. Remember, you can call in anytime, 412-223-6644. Leave a voicemail with your name, where you're from, and give us your question. Keep it under a minute. We'll get it answered on the show. Thanks again for everyone for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. Remember, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, because we're every day, no matter what, unless I'm on vacation. And even when I've been on vacation, I put up episodes, and people who follow this show know I do that. So if you want to help out the show and you're enjoying what you see, you go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars, add a positive comment with those 5 stars. You do both at the same time, you get a special shout out at the end of the show. Like this person, we have Mercy and Grace 325 who says, I did not G that coming. Ha ha ha. Good pun. I would Yoshi Bop this. If you follow me at Carter Critiques on Twitter, you know I love to use the Yoshi Bonk as the official. That was a corny joke move or GIF that I use. But anyways, Mercy and Grace says, I did not see that coming. That was pretty funny. What do you think of the Steelers trading Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool, or instead of Chase Claypool in a first round pick for Deebo Samuel? I've talked about this briefly before, so I'll keep it short here. No. Deebo Samuel, you think Deontay Johnson has a drops problem? Go look at who leads the NFL in drops and drops rate. It's Deebo Samuel. He was very excited for the 49ers and could do some stuff there that's interesting. But the Steelers got enough talent. I think they have enough in the talent of Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool to not need to go get a Deebo Samuel who wants to stay as a wide receiver and not be in the multi-role usage that the San Francisco 49ers found success in. If you could grab Deebo Samuel off the street for nothing, sure, go ahead, give it a shot. But there's no reason to give up another wide receiver for him, especially when Deebo Samuel's on the final year of his contract, just like Deontay Johnson, and Chase Claypool has another year of control under his contract. So no, not making that move. But I do think it's important to ask the question just to see, hey, who's out there? Because it's always interesting to see what different the Steelers could do. Thanks again for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. I'll be back on your screens and in your ears very soon.